Assalamu alaikum. I'm Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum, and I'm Amanda. And this is Converts Unplugged. No fluff, no holding back, just honest conversation.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, a platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam from the Shahada and beyond. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much to all our listeners that we had for the first episode. Amanda and I are eternally grateful, and we are absolutely overwhelmed with the wonderful feedback we have received. So welcome to episode 2. Let's get straight into it.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair, Aisha. I think we need to introduce, first of all, our special guest for this month's episode. Jazakallah khair for joining us, to Brother Yahya Birt. Just a brief bio. Brother Yahya is a writer and an academic. MashaAllah, he's currently doing his PhD at Leeds University. He is a long-time convert to Islam. I think, mashallah, he's been Muslim longer than either of us. And he is currently writing a couple of books, which he's going to tell us about a bit later. And we're also going to be talking about books that we recommend for the new Muslim.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Yahya. Again, thank you so much for joining us. So I'm sure the listeners are wondering exactly who you are and what inspired you to take your Shahada. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I often, assalamu alaikum, first of all, and welcome to, thank you for having me on this podcast. It's a great honor, and I wish Converts Unplugged every success going forward. I think spaces like this are incredibly important for us to develop a solid sense of identity and culture and religion. I've spoken recently last year as part of the Hiwar television series on profiling converts who's embraced Islam. I did a kind of a 45-minute interview with Dr. Azam Tamimi, so you can find a sort of more detailed version of how I came to Islam and my first few years as a Muslim. You can find that there.
Okay, I think we can post the link along with our podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So that our listeners can access that.
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. So basically, I became a Muslim in 1989 at the age of 21. Alhamdulillah. Yeah. What really inspired me was the example of somebody who I would describe as a friend of God, a wali Allah. He was a wisecracking metallurgist from Lahore, who I met at university. But he was wonderful. He is a wonderful man, and other people have embraced Islam at his hands. But the most important thing to know about my friend Falahuddin is that he showed what Islam was through his actions.
MashaAllah.
And how he was, rather than preaching Islam through words.
That's how it should be.
I mean, he did that, but only after 4 years of me knowing him in my case. So he showed rather than told first, if you see what I mean. So, so in other words, built up a sense of intrigue, curiosity in me. That at the end of 4 years I said, so what is this religion that you're following? And the thing is that I converted to Islam not intellectually but on a sense of emotional trust in this man. I kind of had questions to deal with as I went along over the next several years, intellectually, when I was finding my own feet, but I embraced Islam as a matter of trust in someone who I trusted implicitly as a sort of older brother. And that's my story, and I know that there are many other stories and different ways to come to Islam, but that's, in a nutshell, that's my story. So in 1989, I mean, it was a different world back then to what it is now. There were far fewer converts, and although there had been historic convert communities, of course, the three most notable being Liverpool, Woking, and Norwich.
Yeah.
And I would add to that probably Brixton as well. So four 4. Those would be the most notable. So I think that, but nonetheless, when converts were relatively speaking more few and far between, and so there was less a sense of community and more about trying to make it on your own, if you like, within the wider community. And along those first few years, I had some wonderful mentors and friends. Some of the people I formed very close bonds with, who helped me in those early years and guided me step by step through the basics and a kind of cultural orientation.
Well, when you say that you had, mentors and friends, were these other people who had converted, or were they people who had been born into Muslim families?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay.
I mean, the first 3 years I spent in Tablighi Jamaat. So my mentor was a local Tablighi worker in South London, and called Najib Adia, and he was kind of like an uncle to me, and really, was just looked after me in a very personal way. It wasn't just because I was involved in doing the Tablighi Jamaat work. He was a real brother to me, and really, often sorted me out with any sort of personal problems or questions that I had.
Okay.
So he was there. He was there for me, and I spent a lot of time praying in the local mosque with him and doing the work and so on. And it was a fantastic aid and help. And I'm still in touch with the family, with his son, and everything. The other person who was important to me after I went back to university at SOAS in London was a friend called Maulana Ismail Gungat. He was a graduate of the Bury Darul Uloom.
Okay, mashallah.
And he was the head of the Islamic Society at SOAS, the president, and I was the vice president. And so we worked very closely together for a few years in what was a very, tumultuous time in Muslim student politics back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
So in the early 90s, there was a lot of intense debate around aqidah, belief, fundamental beliefs, and about politics amongst young Muslim students. And so, the Maulana and I tried to hold our ISOC together, and so as an open space where everybody could be involved in a non-sectarian way, and sort of try to navigate, all the controversies that were cropping up at the time. So after the relative sort of peace and quiet of the Tablighi Jamaat, I got thrown into the cauldron of Muslim student politics and being sort of thrown into the deep end of all the different groups that are out there. And, of course, a middle class, well-educated white convert is potentially a kind of trophy for them. My father, and this is sort of magnified in my case because my father at that time was probably at his most famous. So he was Director General of the BBC at the time, John Birt. So he was probably at his most famous, and so as his son, I had a kind of cachet.
Definitely, yes.
I should be the kind of perfect person to put on a board of advisors for a funding bid, or or to speak, at big conferences and the like.
Yes.
And promote Islam using my name, sort of referred celebrity that the name Birt had attached to it at the time. But I took a decision that, while my parents were very liberally minded from the 60s generation, and they were neither were believers. They'd rejected religion, but they had that kind of liberal belief that, of course, everyone has to find their own way. Although they didn't approve of my choice of becoming Muslim, they respected my right to be one. But I took the decision in the 90s that I wouldn't play a public role as a Muslim because I didn't want to cash in on my father's name. My judgment was that could potentially, well, not that would, they would look down on that and see that as a way of as a kind of an exploitative move, I guess. A bit cheap, if you know what I mean. A cheap move, and I agreed with them, you know, and I wanted them to respect me and the faith that I had adopted. So I took the decision that I wasn't going to play any high-profile public role in the community, or do any speaking events, or do any writing. Until I didn't plan this, making it sound like it was planned, but that was my instinct. Well, when my father stood down from the BBC in 2000, then I thought, okay, you know, I kind of felt, okay, maybe I can stick my head above the parapet a bit more, which is what I did.
So with regards to what you said, going back to what you said about converting in 1989 and there not being much of a convert community back then, and obviously, you know, you had the fact that your father was the Director General of the BBC at the time. What would you say, specifically for you as an individual, as a white convert as well, what were your biggest challenges? Were these your biggest challenges at the time? What would you say, you know, you faced, and what did you have to overcome?
I think that what I had to overcome in the immediate context of Tablighi Jamaat, actually, which was my first 3 years as a Muslim, was them not really understanding my situation and how I had to negotiate the relationship with my family. So they were very nervous about me being kind of pulled off the straight path of Islam by remaining too close with my family. And at the same time, my parents were worried that I'd been brainwashed by a cult. Okay, especially when I went and spent 4 months in India, Pakistan. They were really worried for me then, and sent people after me to talk to me to try and convince me to come back and all sorts. You know, I even have some of the letters that my mum gave me from the time where I'm kind of trying to reassure her and everything. You know, letters written from Pakistan saying, look, it's okay, it's not a cult, you know, I'll be okay, you know, kind of thing. But I think, you know, I was trying to find myself, and definitely that was probably a period of relative estrangement for me and my family. But the important thing is I refused to let the Jamaat encourage me to create too big a distance. So, you know, I stayed at home, I didn't move out. I wanted to send the signal to my parents at the time that, look, you know, I'm with you, but I'm on my own journey.
Also, to add, it's not often you hear of converts joining Tablighi Jamaat. What made you decide that was the path you wanted to follow, or was it just the influence of the brother you mentioned earlier?
I don't think it was that. It was that considered. It was what was offered to me, and I took it. You know, because the thing is that there weren't a lot of convert-run options out there. There was no internet. You know, the sense of there being a national community like there is now didn't really exist. There were lots of local communities around local mosques. Tabligh was a way, and back then, and I guess still is, of sort of connecting up local communities together, because groups would travel around the country, and you know, so when I it was a good introduction for me, because first 40 days I went all around mosques in the north of England, you know, and so, you know, in Lancashire, Yorkshire, at the northeast, and I met lots of different people that way. Before going back to London to stay with my family and live with my family, because I'd grown up in London, you know, and I got to know London. So I really got around, and, you know, you get around in Jamaat and you go to different mosques and you know, meet lots of different people door to door. So it's a good introduction to meeting different parts of very local communities that didn't really have a very strong sense of being a national community at the time. I mean, of course, that was changing. The Rushdie affair had happened, and the community was beginning to mobilize politically together and to have a sense of itself as potentially being a national community. So within that, converts were just in local situations. So, you know, you just feel, you know, you have local friends, local resources, and that was what you fell into.
That's very true. You just sort of fell into whoever happened.
But alhamdulillah,
yeah,
it was. I have no regrets. You know,
absolutely.
The Jamaat were very supportive to me, and you know, and I left them in goodwill when I felt I had to look for other things too. But I benefited greatly from the support they gave me in those first few years.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
So looking back, I mean, mashallah, you're a very seasoned Muslim now, tabarakallah. It's been nearly, 31 years, is it, mashallah?
Coming up in October.
Mashallah, tabarakallah.
Mashallah, tabarakallah.
SubhanAllah.
Looking back, is there anything that you think you would have done differently? Like if you could advise your younger self today, is there anything that you would advise yourself to do differently in hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if my example is a textbook way of handling everything. I mean, I almost think that it was a bit passive, and I kind of fell into things. It wasn't planned. You know, nothing was planned. Yeah, a lot of decision making wasn't very considered. You know, I kind of went with the flow. I mean, the thing is that I'm reluctant to kind of make my story a template of how to do it for other people. I would just offer kind of general advice and say, you know, trust your instincts. Take your time. Don't rush anything. Don't feel pressurized to rush into everything. All these born Muslims are on the same journey as you. They're struggling like you to make sense of it. And so take your time to find your feet. You know, start with the basics, start with the 5 pillars, start with the fundamentals around Allah and his prophet, the fundamentals of faith. Just focus on the fundamentals and getting those right. You don't have to become the super Muslim overnight. Transform yourself to fit in. I mean, I did that. I did all of that. I had a really long beard and a lovely imama, and I was giving, you know, bayans in the mosque, you know, the 6 Tablighi Jamaat 6 points and all of that. Even at the Islamic Society, I gave a khutbah once or twice, which kind of now, you know, fills me with horror. Because I didn't know how much I didn't know. The kind of false confidence of the new convert. The self-righteous or righteous overconfidence that we all kind of go through, and desperately trying to belong in the wider community and make a mark with our new family and impress them and everything. And you know, I guess that's a kind of phase we all have to go through, but sometimes it's a little bit painful looking back.
It is painful in hindsight, isn't it?
I'm looking at it, but you know, and our fellow brothers and sisters are very tolerant of our excesses, no doubt. May Allah reward them.
Ameen, Ya Rab.
You know, I mean, but you know, that's all just part of growing up, isn't it?
It is,
growing into something. I just think if we were better organized as a community, we might avoid some of the excesses in that process. And there have been excesses that have been unacceptable as well as excesses that are perfectly understandable. And so I think, you know, we can't be complacent and just have a kind of laissez-faire status quo. Carry on with that, I don't think.
I have to say, I commend you on your decision to not take a public station on the back of your father's position in those years, because nowadays, I'm sort of equating this to what we see nowadays with social media and people who have a little bit of influence on social media converting and using their platform. And there's so many people I see who have been Muslim, you know, a few weeks, and they're on their Instagram and their Twitter and their Snapchat and what have you, giving fatwas and talking about, you know, Islam. And some of the stuff that they say is good, but because they're putting themselves on such a public platform, they're also opening themselves up to a lot of critique and to a lot of trolling, stalking, even in some cases. So, I mean, obviously this was before all of that, but you can sort of guess at how you may have been treated and scrutinized if you had taken any sort of public platform at all.
Look, you know, we live in different times now.
Definitely,
I mean,
yes.
our whole idea of what's private as opposed to what's public, or what's private as opposed to what's secret, I mean, these are changing radically now in the digital age. We can't go back to the past. I mean, however conversion is going to happen nowadays, I think it's probably going to have a much more public element early on.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're seeing. So I think we need to find ways to remind ourselves about the importance of cultivating sincerity and maybe retaining a sense of privacy and even secrecy in our relationship with Allah. The du'as, the prayers that we do on our own. Take some spiritual practices that are entirely private, so that it's not all about public performance. Obviously parts of religious life are public. We pray together, we give charity together, we come together to do good in the world. Obviously there's a public dimension to our faith as well, but there's a private one too, and we need to become very self-conscious about that private dimension as we live increasingly very sort of public lives online. I think without that self-conscious course correction, we see people crashing and burning online.
We do.
And it's not pretty, and it's not nice, and it has this blowback from it.
No, I often say to sisters who I mentor, I am so grateful to Allah that I became Muslim before social media was a thing, because I can imagine what I would have gone through based on what I see them going through, and trying to sort of claw back any sense of privacy that they can, because their lives have been lived online essentially, for public consumption. And now you want to have some privacy. Yeah. And the public is not allowing it, or the public is criticizing you for trying to have that. It is a really difficult situation to navigate, subhanAllah. So
we should go easy on ourselves, because the whole of society is struggling with what this means.
Yes, that's
not just
true.
Muslims.
Yes, that's a good point, actually, subhanAllah.
Yeah, we nobody has the answers here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we shouldn't beat ourselves up. But I think what we can do is rely on our faith tradition to try and ground us in this matter, and try and seek guidance and counsel on these matters, and try and think through some of the issues together.
Now, as this is a podcast for, our audience, our target audience is other converts, new and old. But one aim is to offer our insights to help those who are new to Islam with their journey. And today we thought we'd discuss some recommended reading for new Muslims, or for those who are interested in converting to Islam. And I know I've got several books in mind, and we've decided that I'm only allowed to pick 3. So we've been limited. And Aisha's also only picked 3. But I'd like to know, Brother Yahya, seeing you've been the longest, you're the oldest Muslim, quote unquote, out of the 3 of us here. Do you have any recommendations? Or when you first became Muslim or were interested in Islam, were there any works that were pivotal to you in your journey?
Thank you for asking that. It's a very good question. Let me caveat and say that self-study is important. Books are important. Sometimes you don't have access to a mentor. But I would really say that having a trusted mentor is number one.
Absolutely.
And you supplement that with reading. You supplement it with reading. But having said all of that, let me get on to books that inspired me at the time. So, like I was saying earlier, there weren't so many resources around back then. But that doesn't mean that we didn't have some wonderful ones. So I'm going to mention 3 that were influential in my first sort of several years of being Muslim. One of the first ones that I'm going to pick up here that I read in the first year that I became Muslim was a wonderful multi-part series by Sheikh Abul-Hasan al-Nadwi, who died in 1999. In fact, I was privileged to meet him when I was in India. He had retired at that point. He was living in his natal village in Uttar Pradesh. This is when I was on the 4 months Tablighi tour of India and Pakistan. And he asked me, had I read any of his books? And he said, and I regret I haven't, because I didn't even know who he was at the time. Obviously, one of the great scholars of the 20th century. And so he gave me a couple of his books. But then when I got back to Delhi, I promised myself I would try and buy as many of his books as I could before I left India. And so this was the book I picked up, one of the books I picked up, Saviours of the Islamic Spirit. And what it is a series of short biographies of renewers of the Islamic faith, going back to the time of the Abbasids all the way up to the present day. It spreads across 5 volumes, but the most famous are the first 2. And, you know, my appreciation for this book has only grown because I think I read it too early in my journey. I didn't really understand everything and much of what was in the book. But what I came out from the book at the time was a really important sense of the vastness of the Islamic tradition, and that it was possible to be there are different kinds of Muslim that you could be. There wasn't sort of an identikit Muslim. So from a Sunni perspective, Orthodox perspective, this is a very open-minded book. You've got Ibn Taymiyyah, and you've got, you know, Hassan al-Basri, or you've got, you know, Shah Waliullah of Delhi. You know, you have all kinds of people profiled in this book. So that was the most important thing. What's very important, you know, very important when we come into the faith is that often we join a jamaat or a movement, and they tell us that, you know, we're on the right path. You have to stick with us, like a limpet. If you step outside of this charm circle, you'll be in the Wild West. You'll be, you know, you're gonna struggle. Now, I agree with, as I said earlier, keeping things simple. But I don't agree with being naive either. So I think reading this book, Saviours of the Islamic Spirit, it gave me a kind of map, a kind of broad, open-minded map of Sunni Islam through history. So it gave me a little bit of inkling of the kind of complex world that I was about to step into. So in that sense, it was a very good orientation, you know, and a relatively fair-minded and broad-minded one at that.
Okay,
you know.
Mashallah. That's a good understanding to have, because Islam, you know, we have this idea of Islam as being homogenous, but as humans, we are very non-homogenous. We are very, very diverse, and our understanding of Islam and how we express it is going to be diverse as well. So understanding that, you know, there is this diversity of thought and approach and methodology is an important understanding to come to in the early days, because otherwise we can get judgmental and frustrated when we see people doing things a way that's different from what we're accustomed to, for example.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And of course, it's just over time finding the confidence to navigate a very complex terrain.
Yes.
You know, it's not, we should also be compassionate to ourselves and understand that it is actually a very tall order of business that every Muslim struggles with, not just converts.
Yes, absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah. So you don't beat ourselves up for not being master navigators, you know.
True.
We don't even know what the map looks like or what a compass looks like at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. So true. So true.
So the second book that really inspired me, is Shifa, the healing of Qadi Iyad. Okay, so this book is about how to love the Prophet.
It is an amazing book.
It's how to love the Prophet. It's not his life story. It's really, what is your spiritual relationship with the Prophet? And it's really the first half of the book that does that. The second half is sort of a bunch of legal rulings about blasphemy and insulting the Prophet. But it's really the first half of the book that really inspired me. And it was translated by one of our great translators, Aisha Bewley, who over many decades, she's now sort of semi-retired in Bradford, but is still churning out many different translations even now. May Allah preserve her.
Ameen.
But you know, this is one of her the master works. This is one of the most influential books ever written about the Prophet. It came out of North Africa and some hundreds of years ago, but it's one of the most widely read books on the Prophet, historically speaking, and it's easy to see why once you read it, because it's unique. And I think it's essential. I would divide people, the Ummah up into people who've read this book and those who haven't.
Yeah, I haven't. So I need to read that. I need to read it.
It has to be read, because otherwise, without reading it, you can consider the Prophet as a kind of just someone who just conveys God's messages to you. And taking the idea of messenger very, very kind of functionally. That is a cardboard cutout version of the Prophet.
Absolutely.
And so knowing the Prophet should be at the center of our journey as Muslims.
Yeah.
Because he is our model. He is our model. He is our guide. He is, the one who shows us how to be with Allah first and foremost. Everybody else is following his guidance and how to do that. Anybody else we meet on our journey. So there's that book. And the third book, I couldn't find it. I don't know where it is, but it's the Seerah of the Prophet. Okay.
Yeah.
And there are many nowadays. But the one that I read and that really inspired me was the biography by Martin Lings.
Yes.
Simply called Muhammad, his life based on the earliest sources. And really what that book is a summary of Ibn Hisham's account, which is the first major biography of the Prophet that's written in Arabic about 150 years or so after the Prophet's death. This is the kind of, but the thing is that it's not a translation. If you've ever looked at the original, it's very difficult for a modern reader to get their head around. It's lots of reports kind of strung together. What Martin Lings does with great mastery is to create a highly eloquent and inspiring narrative story from that source, and also setting out a kind of wider context of the Middle East and the religious context at the time, so we can sort of find our way into this world. And I think it's one of the few masterworks in the English language, and it was acknowledged in the Muslim world because it was translated into other languages from English, and it was given international awards. And I still think there isn't a seerah that is as well written as this one. But I would caution and say it's very high English. Lings was he was a keeper of Arabic manuscripts at the British Library for decades. He was also a noted Shakespeare scholar.
Wow,
okay,
mashallah.
He was a poet as well. Bringing all those things together, reading Abu Bakr Sirajuddin's life of the Prophet, you're dealing with somebody who is writing at a very high level. So it may not be for everybody. You may want to first tackle a simpler, more straightforward telling of the Prophet's life. But there's poetry and magic in Lings's version.
Something to look out for.
Yeah, he does magical things with the English language. And we read so much Islamic literature in English that it's clear that it's not the author's first language.
Yeah,
because
absolutely agree.
They can't make the language sing. There's no poetry in it. There's no beautiful prose, really. It's very pedestrian.
Yes.
And, Arabic is not pedestrian. Urdu is not pedestrian. Neither is Turkish or Farsi. All the other great languages. So the thing is that we're slowly coming into, English is slowly becoming a major Islamic language. But to become a major Islamic language, we need great works written originally in English.
Yes. I agree.
And one of the first of these is Martin Lings' biography of the Prophet. So let's not neglect it. Let's hold it up and let's value it. The others I would pick out would be Pickthall's translation of the Qur'an, as well as the poetry of Abdel, and some of his prose writing, like the Faith of Islam. We do have a small tradition of great Islamic literature originally written in English, and that is only growing with time. It's not getting smaller, but we have some brave pioneers out there who we should celebrate, and we should keep those works alive and keep reading them.
I agree with you what you said about the language of Lings' biography of the Prophet ﷺ. I read it only recently. I think maybe 2 years ago was when I studied it, and I have to say for myself, alhamdulillah, I read it when I read it and not earlier because of the level of the language, because I already knew the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. I had read other works. I had, we've all seen The Message and so on and so forth. So, the historical facts in the Sirah. So that aided engaging with that level of English for me. Because I think when I read English, because English is quite straightforward, it is quite a straightforward language, and it's not, when I read English, I prefer very clear English, whereas it is more literary, as it were. And so it aided my engagement already having a knowledge of the subject matter.
I don't think any of the books I've mentioned, the 3 books, are beginner books.
No, they're not.
But they are books that I began with. But I don't think when I read them, I was ready. I could entirely get my head around them. That doesn't mean that they weren't inspiring and transformational nonetheless, despite the fact that I wasn't really ready to appreciate them fully. And even now, do you think with great books, you can return to them again and again and get something different out of them? It doesn't mean that you have to read a book once. With great books, you read them many times because you've changed, and because you've changed,
and you find something
the book is different for you the next time you read it. In a great book, there are layers like an onion. So, and I have no problem with saying go back and read a great book. Even read a great book that you're not entirely you're not going to 100% understand either. I think the idea of putting that the beginner books that we give people should just be simple, plain, functional, like primers, just primers, so that the person reading them will 100% understand every word in the book, and that's our educational duty. I'm not sure I entirely buy that. Yes, there's a place for primers, but also there's a place for being stretched, confused, perplexed, but inspired.
That's
so
true.
Great books stretch you and pull you out of your comfort zone. So great books push you and challenge you, and we should be challenged.
I would say definitely when I read the second book that you mentioned, Qadi Iyad, that book stretched me. And I read it last year with a teacher.
Yeah.
And I think if I had tried to read it by myself, I would not have gotten as much as I got from it. And it, but definitely it was a mental exercise, quite literally. I would come out of the class tired, but I felt revived at the same time, subhanAllah.
I mean, with the Qadi Iyad book, I should just add to what you just said. Years after I read it, I was asked to sit in on a class, one of the first classes held in Britain by Sheikh Mohammed Al-Yaqubi. And he was teaching a class on the Shifa.
Okay.
He was going through one of the first parts of the Shifa, first chapters, and core chapters on the love of the Prophet. And we were reading Aisha Bewley's translation, and every second sentence, because the Sheikh was going through the Arabic, I was reading out the translation, and every second sentence he was stopping me and correcting the translation. So and pulling out all these wonderful meanings out of the text and so on. So I completely agree with you that there's only so much you can do with self-study. Self-study is important. And it's how you round yourself out, your understanding. You need to do self-study, but you have to combine it with teaching, with being mentored and being taken through books, or having somebody as a resource person to go and ask questions of when things are confusing, you don't understand. But we shouldn't entirely rely on self-study, but don't give up reading books on your own either. It's just a question of having a mixed approach.
Yes, that's very true. And Jazakallah khair for that input. Aisha, what have you got for us?
I feel a bit rubbish now because of how wonderful and academic Brother Yahya's are.
Look, there's nothing superior about being academic. The truth is it's Allah doesn't judge us on our education. He judges us on our intentions and sincerity. So it doesn't matter. It's not a competition. You asked me to share what books inspired me, and this is just for me, my journey. It's not saying that this is what everyone else has to do. I'm just saying this is what inspired. These are 3 books that came to mind that inspired me in my early years, and I wanted to share that with you. But I'm not.
Mashallah.
It's not a competition.
Wallahi. No, of course, mashallah. Yeah. The thing is, I did when we discussed this topic, I did actually pick books with the kind of very new convert in mind. So that's what I'm referring to here. So they're quite simple. The thing is, I could recommend so many, so I'm just going to pick 3. Okay, so one of them is actually going to be, it literally is a new Muslim guidebook, to be honest, and I'm going to read the title. It's very new. It's called The New Muslim's Field Guide. Now, it's written by 2 convert sisters after being Muslim for several years, and I ordered this copy very recently. I skim read it similarly because of the fact that, you know, I've been Muslim for 15 years. I kind of have an idea of what they're going on about, but it's absolutely fantastic. So for a new Muslim brother or sister, like very new, whether you've recently taken your Shahada or been Muslim for a few years, I highly recommend this book. It is like a guidebook. It's very simple to read. So there is, you know, there's no complicated language. You can dip in and out. You can read it in completely different order. You know, there are many, many chapters, but I personally think, and I think Amanda agrees with me, we could have written this book. We could have absolutely easily. And I think, especially for women, if you don't mind me saying, listeners, I think it would save a lot of trouble for many convert women out there in particular. That doesn't mean to say that none of the convert brothers should read the entire contents or benefit from this, but I absolutely think this is invaluable, and I think brilliant piece, brilliant book to go forward.
It's a very
with,
practical
inshallah.
guide.
It's very practical, yes.
It's less about the religion and the spirituality and more about your day-to-day life, how to tackle dunya as a convert, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think what it does, without sounding kind of like, well, miserable about it, I suppose you could say, it kind of bursts that bubble that I think actually needs to be burst, because when we come into Islam, whether you're male or female, we have this idea that, you know, Islam's wonderful, then therefore all the, you know, the brothers and sisters will be wonderful, and I'm going to be treated absolutely wonderfully, and no one's going to do wrong by me. You know, everyone is so pious and righteous and upright, and this isn't always the case, that unfortunately many of us find. And also going back to what we discussed, or Brother Yahya, you discussed earlier, of, you know, not rushing into things. You know, we all say this now, but back then we don't realize we're doing exactly that. We're rushing into things. You know, again, you picked up on the fact that, you know, navigating the cultural elements of the ummah and influences from our peers. You know, it's a big thing. Like you said, it's a big thing. We don't have that compass and we don't have that map. You know, and, you know, for example, I know for myself, which I have touched upon in many podcasts and whatnot, and probably for Amanda as well. Yeah, I have gone from one extreme to the other. And I'm only now finding out who Aisha is as a British Muslim, you know, and it's not been easy. It's not been easy at all. And alhamdulillah, I wouldn't change anything at all. It's made me who I am. It's made me resilient, you know, and I have a newfound understanding of the deen, inshallah. I'm still learning. I certainly do not know everything, and I think I've come back down to earth with a bob there. Alhamdulillah, rightly so. But I think, you know, having a guidebook, I suppose you could say, is definitely something I would highly recommend everyone to have. And I think this book, in its simplicity, which it is, does the job very well, inshallah. So that's the first one. The other one I don't have to hand, and again, these would be what you call primers, Brother Yahya, but I think they're really important, is actually Dua, the Weapon of the Believer by Yasir Qadhi. Because I think, and I still have a copy, I read that years and years ago when I first took my Shahada in 2005, and you know, it stuck with me. And it, again, what you said, okay, it might not be a literary masterpiece, but, you know, it's something you can refer back to, because we all slip in our iman, we all slip in our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, I know for a fact right now I'm not making as much dua as I should, and as we know, you know, alhamdulillah, dua is actually a form of ibadah, it's a form of worship. And the book goes through different types of dua, what's acceptable, what's not. It's not an instructional manual, but it does outline what dua actually is and how, you know, we should go about them. When the duas are accepted, for example, the times of day, and the virtue of making dua, you know, the fact, like I said, it's an ibadah, subhanAllah. So I think that's an invaluable book for a beginner.
Can I just say that I completely agree with you. Well, my sort of really first dua book I encountered was Hizb al-Azam, and it's a 16th century classic. It's meant to be read over a week.
Wow.
So you've got dua. The first half is the first day is duas from the Quran, all the duas from the Quran, and then after that, it's sort of duas. The rest of it is duas from the Sunnah. But sort of arranged in a certain way and spread out over 7 days. There's a whole day of salawat on the Friday to be read on Friday.
Oh, okay.
And it's just I'm not claiming I read that every week. I'm just saying that it's just full of wonderful du'as.
MashaAllah.
You know, I mean, the one thing I would really, I've looked for this book for years. I've never really come across it in English, but I'd love someone to do it, which would be just a book on the spirituality of the Prophet through his du'as, just analyzing it, you know, in some detail, because there are thousands of du'as out there from the Prophet, and it's really about covers the whole of life, day and night, and daily activities.
Absolutely.
And different distresses that were put in. You know, there's so much just in the du'as alone. And I wish I could sort of see a kind of a analysis of the du'as of the Prophet. Because, you know, that would be amazing. Just on his spiritual, you know, his spiritual heart, spiritual dimension. You see it in the du'as. And I would love to have that book, but I've never seen it.
If any scholars are listening, there's a hint for your next work, inshallah.
I'll publish it at Cube. I'll get it published at Cube.
Inshallah.
That'd be brilliant. MashaAllah.
I was actually going to recommend a dua book, actually. I think I mean, I think, again, I'm coming from the viewpoint of being absolutely brand new here. But I still think it's invaluable. So The Fortress of the Muslim. It's so simple and it's so small. It's literally a pocket-sized book. And I think it's blooming brilliant. Because it doesn't go into much detail or description per se, but I think, again, similarly to what Brother Yahya said, it has du'as for morning, noon, and night for absolutely every type of situation you could find yourself in. I remember I actually learned Ayatul Kursi from there. I didn't even understand the weight of that in terms of how much of a good deed that was to learn Ayatul Kursi. I just happened to open the book, and obviously back then I was able to memorize more than maybe now, subhanAllah. But I just find it amazing. I think it's, you know, I have a copy at home which I refuse to bin, not that I would, but you know what I'm trying to say, because it's absolutely battered. It's so well thumbed. It doesn't have a cover anymore, but it's so valuable to me. You know, I find the du'as absolutely amazing. You know, it's the first book of du'as I ever learned. I learned istikhara from there, which alhamdulillah I now know off by heart and utilize on a daily basis. I just think it's a brilliant book, and every Muslim should have it, whether you're new or not.
Absolutely. And I think that particular book is probably the one book that is included in every new Muslim pack that anybody has ever given. I still have my copy that I was given at London Central Mosque when I took Shahada, and I have about 15 other copies as well, because, you know, every time I go to a book fair, they're giving them out for free, and you just always think, oh, I could give this to somebody. So I've always got a few to hand to give to people. And I think that it's important because we do get caught up in our daily lives, and we forget the importance of dua, of dhikr, of just remembering Allah in everything that we're doing, and how, you know, subhanAllah, even mundane daily activities can become acts of worship if they're done, you know, with Allah in mind. So I think that that's a very important book that will help. It helps us to set up that habit. And we learn how the Prophet ﷺ did these things. And of course, that's going to be the best example to be following, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Alhamdulillah. Okay. MashaAllah.
So Amanda, what do you have?
My turn. Okay. Well, let me start. So I picked 3 books. And I mean, obviously, the book, the Qur'an, is going to be the most important one.
Yeah.
But I decided to recommend Professor Haleem's Understanding the Qur'an Themes and Styles. It's what I find a lot of the sisters who I mentor will not complain, but will comment that they try picking up the Qur'an and reading it, obviously in translation, and they find that they can't engage with it. And maybe that's the style of the English that it's translated into, although I've heard it for, more simple, like straightforward translations as well. I've heard this comment. And I think the problem is that a lot of us coming from English-speaking backgrounds, we pick up the Qur'an thinking that it's going to be a book of stories, rather like the Bible is, and that we can engage with it and read it from cover to cover the same way we would read that. And it doesn't, but it isn't. It isn't composed that way. It's composed more like, how it's collected, how it's organized is very different to that. And Abdul-Halim, in this book, he discusses different themes from within the Qur'an. And so understanding these themes and how they're discussing the Qur'an and where they're discussing the Qur'an, the idea is that then you're more able to engage with the Qur'an when you're reading it. So he discusses, for example, Al-Fatiha in quite a lot of detail. And then he looks like, for example, the theme of water in the Qur'an, marriage and divorce, war and peace, tolerance, life and beyond, paradise in the Qur'an, and so on. So he's organized it thematically in order to help people to get more out of actually sitting down and reading the Qur'an, even if you're just reading it in translation. So that is my first recommendation. Second recommendation is Imam an-Nawawi's 40 Hadith. This book, much like what Brother Yahya said about you read something very early on and then you come back to it later, and because of what you've learned in the intervening years or your experiences, you gain more from it, you engage with it at a different level. I keep coming back to this collection. And I think of all the different 40 Hadith collections that I've read, this one I think though is the most basic and essential one for all Muslims to read. Obviously Imam an-Nawawi, he compiled it for that purpose because, it's sort of the absolute, as it says on the back of it, is the absolute minimum of fiqh for Muslims to understand. It starts out with actions or by intentions and goes on from there and describes what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan, and so on. And I went through this very early on my own and read it just as, a book. There was no commentary with the one that I had then. And it was just literally a book of hadith. And I didn't understand the simpler meaning behind it, but it gave me ideas. And then when I went through it later, we went through it in a class that I take. And the depth that we went into with each hadith really opened my eyes to a lot of deeper meaning. And I think that this is absolutely an essential reading, but I would recommend it's one you can read on your own, but it's also something that definitely would be good to go through with a teacher if you have access to such. And then my third recommendation is by Naima B. Robert, who is, of course, a convert sister, mashallah. And it's From My Sister's Lips, which is just basically a collection of stories of other women who have converted to Islam and their experiences, a lot of reflections, talking about their family issues, talking about how they, how they sort of came out of the conversion closet to their families and so on and so forth. Obviously, I think this is a very female-centric book, although I think brothers could benefit from it as well. But I've had this book for years. I think somebody gave it to me when I first converted. And said, this will help you. Because I was, my mother wasn't very accepting and so on. And she said, I think this will help you. And she even said, give it to your mom. Which I did. I have no idea if my mom's even read it or even still has it. But I did give it to my mom. And I think it can be one of those books that can help people to understand a little bit more about why people, and women especially, convert to Islam, especially because, we still, and this has always been the case, I converted in 97, 98, Brother Yahya in 89, and even back then, and today even more, the narrative around Islam is one of oppressing women. And I think that this book helps to sort of undo that narrative to an extent, because it helps people understand, why are women converting to this religion if it's oppressing them? And to understand,
and we make up the most of converts, don't we? Women make up the vast majority of converts.
That's very true.
Regardless of where we're from. So
that's very true too. So I thought that this is a good book for everybody. As I said, there are so many others that I could recommend. But these three are sort of the basics. One to get to grips with the Qur'an, one to, take examples from the Prophet ﷺ on the basics, and then another one to help us to navigate our daily lives.
Absolutely. I think between the three of us, we've actually recommended some fantastic stuff, and we've covered a vast majority of the things that as a new Muslim or convert, whatever word you want to use, needs to know.
We haven't got a fiqh book, a basic fiqh book, have we, in there?
That's true. Yes, but then again, fiqh, I don't really know of any that I would recommend.
Yeah.
As a basic primer.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I could recommend one, but it's not very widely available, so I don't know how practical it would be to recommend it.
Which one is it?
Yeah.
It's just a tiny little book called Essential Hanafi Fiqh or something by Faraz Rabbani.
Oh, yeah.
And it's only, 25, 30 pages. It's very concise on tahara, on purification and prayer and fasting. And that's it, just the first three pillars, just so that you know, and some of the basic beliefs, the 6 basic beliefs that we have, fundamental beliefs. Yeah. So it just covers in the most concise possible language and clear standard English. So, I mean, I normally, if you're Sunni, I'll normally say, in Britain, it's a pragmatic decision probably to follow the Hanafi school, because the vast majority of scholars in the UK and muftis, in fact, those who can issue legal opinions, are Hanafi, and that's just a historical accident. It's not really a decision of saying, well, I think this is the best madhab or whatever. It's just a practical decision that if you want a practical guidance, this is probably you'd be making your life easy if you pick one of these. But I'm not being prescriptive there as to which legal school somebody has to follow. But I think that's a good one for the Hanafi school.
Okay, that's an interesting one. I think the first book that I was ever given when I was new, it was called Islam, Beliefs and Teachings by Ghulam Sarwar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Remember that?
I can't say that it was a fiqh primer, but it was sort of encompassed basically everything you would need to know of the basics of Muslim life. And I think I had that book for years after converting, and I would keep referring to it. And I'm pretty sure that was based on Hanafi fiqh as well.
It is Hanafi.
Yeah.
Hanafi book.
But I think anything that covers tahara, prayer and fasting, that will get you through the first year, inshallah. And you'd be surprised how many people don't know the basics, around you, including people that you're trying to ask for advice. It's probably worth getting one, I think.
I think too, there is another book that is given out freely by different organizations, but it's just simply called Tell Me How to Pray. And it goes through the basics of making wudu, so of tahara, of making wudu, ghusl, what breaks those, and then the basics of how to pray. So it talks about the pillars, the compulsory actions in the prayer, and then the sunnah actions in the prayer. Very, very simple. It is a tiny, tiny little booklet, so either the one that you've just recommended, Brother Yahya, or one like this, they serve the same purpose, but just to give you those basic fundamentals of what we have to do every day, essentially.
I'm really excited to read this new Muslim guide. You convinced me I need to get hold of a copy now, because it would be great. It sounds like it fills a much needed gap.
It's super basic though. It's literally meant just to be a guide, very simple English.
No, but the fact you said that it's focused on the sort of, not so much being a fiqh primer, it's more about kind of orientating yourself inside a new community. And I think that there's nothing really much written about that. So I think it's very good that somebody's done it,
Yeah.
So
I do rather wish I had that.
Same.
Is it written with a kind of generic Western context, or is it like assuming that it's UK or?
They're actually 2 American sisters, but it will be a Western context, and it's as if they're having a conversation with you. That's how I found it.
Okay.
So as if you're on the phone. There are some anecdotes as well, but yeah, it's very, very simple. And like Amanda said, I absolutely think this is invaluable, especially again for a female convert. And if you read the book, you'll see why.
And just to wave the Union Jack for a moment, Britain is not exactly the same as America, so just bear that in mind.
No, it's not. That's true. Especially how our community is made up is quite different, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think still a lot of the issues that they cover are
very similar
in the Western context.
Yeah, of course they translate as well, but I'm just saying we always need to have that little filter in as well.
Yeah, true. Absolutely.
There is another book that if I may be so bold as to go over my quota, there's the New Muslim Field Guide, which Aisha recommended. There is another book called just The New Muslim Guide. Now, normally it's one of those books that's given away for free. It is more of a fiqh primer, and it goes through a lot of different things. I will, say up front, there are some things in it that I disagree with. They do make a few comments about, within family life, a few comments about the role of women, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but that's my personal input on it. It is good. What is good about it is that it's published in about 10 different languages.
MashaAllah.
So, the English version is clearly written by somebody who English is their first language, but they have it in French, Spanish, Turkish, Chinese, Polish, Russian, Japanese, and so on. And it is really excellent in that sense. And it's available freely online as well. So it's one of those ones that you can go to, download, dip in and out when you need to, and so on. So that is another resource, which is a little bit more fiqh based. Whereas the New Muslim Field Guide is literally that. It's a field guide. It's how to live your life, as a Muslim, and how to deal with the challenges, so to speak. So, don't get the two confused, but they're both.
I'd like a humorous field guide to Muslims. Funny drawings.
Why don't you write that? I think that'd be fantastic.
Humorous.
Yahya Birt.
So something witty, not too serious.
Oh, I think you should write that. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Actually, all the different types of beards, and then like all the different headscarves you get.
Yes.
What all the coding means,
Brother Yahya.
That's all coding.
Brother Yahya, have you actually ever contemplated writing some kind of biography? Then maybe you could incorporate some of that wit into that. Because it sounds really interesting, actually.
I would read that.
Yeah. I think we need more convert biographies.
I don't know. I don't like making myself the story, but I've got a couple of books on the go at the moment.
Yeah. Mashallah.
Well, one is about is a translation from the Ottoman Turkish of the first ever account of the first mosque community in the UK.
Wow.
Which was a convert community.
Abdullah Quilliam?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was converts and Lascars. These are the sailors who came in and out of the port. So sometimes the numbers of the community grew. But this is fantastic. This is an Ottoman scholar who spent over a month in Liverpool, and he writes a 112-page account.
Wow.
And it was published in Cairo in 1895, and it's brilliant. First-hand account. Based on lots of interviews. Really fascinating. So we've translated it, and we're just finishing off writing the introduction at the moment, and that'll be out in the spring.
That sounds amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's going to stir up a big hornet's nest, but it's a fascinating as well, a very fascinating text. I mean, just genuinely, just really interesting. And then the other book I'm editing with Professor Ranjiz. I'm editing a book on of Abdullah Quilliam's poetry.
Brilliant. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. But unfortunately, Brother Yahya, I'm afraid that is the end of our podcast. We have to wrap up now, inshallah. It has been absolutely amazing having you on. I've certainly enjoyed my time talking to you, and I'm sure Amanda can agree, and the listeners as well, hearing your insights and recommendations. So massive jazakallah khair for you coming on. Thank you so much, and maybe we can have you on again sometime, inshallah.
It'll be an honor and a privilege, and thank you so much for starting this wonderful podcast, and may Allah bless it with success, inshallah, and acceptance.
Ameen. And your books as well. Ameen.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Assalamu alaikum. That's it for another episode of Converts Unplugged. We do hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share on social media and with family and friends.
Yes, please do share and subscribe to our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. Inshallah, Aisha and I will see you next month, where we will be discussing new Muslim do's and don'ts with two very special guests.
It sounds like it's going to be an amazing episode, Amanda, but for now, this is Aisha.
And this is Amanda.
And this has been Converts Unplugged.
Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.